The air hung thick, with a biting, chemical tang as Kale adjusted the straps on his respirator, the hiss of filtered air steady in his ears. Around him, the landscape shifted from the familiar metallic sprawl of the floating city's lower levels to a forbidding stretch of cracked earth and twisted, corroded remnants. This was the Forbidden Zone, a place whispered about in scavenger circles but rarely dared. Here, beneath the toxic fog, lay secrets that the city's rulers had long tried to conceal. Beside him, Iran moved with a cautious grace, his thin frame almost swallowed by the folds of his worn lab coat. The scientist's glasses caught the dim light from the flickering flashlight as he scanned the ground, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into his face. "We're close," Iran murmured, voice barely above the mechanical drone of their breathing apparatuses. The readings suggest something just beneath this layer, artifacts older than anything the city archives mention. Kale's gaze swept the horizon. Jagged metal shards jutted from the ground like the bones of some ancient leviathan, all warped and rusted by years of neglect and exposure. The sky above was a sickly blend of muted purples and grays, the sun a dim glow behind clouds heavy with toxic rain. Every step forward was a reminder of the risk, the ground unstable, the air laced with poisons that no filter could fully purge. They moved slowly, alert to every creak and groan of the earth. Kale's scavenger instincts sharpened. The faintest crack, a shifting shadow, told stories of decay and danger. "Keep close," he said softly, eyes darting to the dark shapes lurking in the fog. Iran nodded, crouching suddenly by a half-buried object. His gloved fingers brushed away layers of contaminated soil, revealing a surface etched with strange symbols. "Look at this," he breathed. The artifact was a fragment of a larger structure, its faded carvings glowing faintly under their lights, a relic from a time before the skies had turned iron and the earth had become poison. Kale felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. How could this have been hidden? Why bury it here? He wondered aloud. "Because the truth is dangerous," Iran replied, voice heavy. "If people knew what was really buried beneath their feet, the experiments, the betrayals, it could shatter everything." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. A low rumble echoed through the fog, dust cascading from the skeletal remains of a collapsed platform overhead. Kale reacted instantly, pulling Iran out of the way as debris tumbled down. Heart pounding, they scrambled to safer ground, the fragile earth threatening to swallow them whole. "We can't stay here long," Kale said, voice tense but steady. "The city's collapse is coming faster than we thought." Iran wiped sweat from his brow, eyes alight with a mix of fear and determination. "But this discovery, it changes everything. If we can bring this to light, maybe there's a chance to fix what's broken." They pressed on, the artifacts growing more numerous and complex as they ventured deeper. Each piece told a fragment of a forgotten story, a world that had once thrived on the surface, undone by hubris and greed. The weight of that truth settled heavily on Kale's shoulders, mingling with the urgency of their mission. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the landscape, the two stood at the edge of the zone, overlooking a vast expanse of ruins swallowed by the poisoned earth. The sky, a bruised canvas of oranges and purples, seemed to weep for what had been lost. Kale's fingers tightened around the artifact in his pack, his mind racing. "We have to bring this back," he said, voice low but resolute. "People need to know." Iran nodded, eyes reflecting the dim light. "Then we're ready for what comes next." Together, they turned back toward the city, hearts heavy but their purpose clear. Beneath the surface, the past waited, and with it, the hope of a future reclaimed from the iron skies and poisoned earth. The journey was far from over, and the dangers ahead only grew sharper. But for Kale and Iran, the discovery beneath the toxic soil was a beacon, a fragile spark of truth in a world on the brink. As they disappeared into the mist, the distant rumble of the floating city's failing engines echoed like a warning. The sky was darkening, and the secrets beneath would soon demand reckoning. Yet amidst the shadows, a stubborn hope flickered, one that would drive them to face the abyss, no matter the cost. The story of their world was buried deep, but it was far from finished. The rebel hideout was a cavernous shell beneath the city's fractured steel skeleton, where muted lights cast long shadows over the cracked concrete floor and scattered remnants of forgotten technology. The stale odor of oil and rust mingled with the faint metallic tang of recycled air. Within this fragile sanctuary, the tension was palpable, thick enough to choke the breath from anyone who dared linger too long. Lyra stood with her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles blanched white, her short-cropped red hair glowing in the flickering light of a battered lantern. Her eyes burned with a fierce intensity, a reflection of the fire that had driven her since the day the city began to crumble. "We can't wait," she said, her voice sharp and urgent. "Every moment we hesitate, the governor tightens his grip. They're slaughtering our people, and all we do is talk. We need to strike back hard and fast." Iran, seated across the table, adjusted his glasses nervously, the thin frame slipping down his narrow nose. His lab coat, worn and stained from days of toil, seemed at odds with the harsh surroundings. "Lyra," he replied, his tone measured but firm, "I understand your anger, but rushing into a battle we're not prepared for will only lead to more deaths. We must be methodical, gather more intelligence, and find the weaknesses in their defenses. If we lose our people now, there may be none left to fight later." The words hung between them, a chasm wide enough to swallow their fragile alliance. Kale watched them both, feeling the weight of every gaze falling upon him. He was the reluctant leader now, thrust into a role he neither sought nor desired. His lean frame was tense, shoulders hunched beneath the patchwork scavenger gear that had become his armor. His dark hair, usually unkempt from months of survival, fell messily over his brow as he rubbed a hand tiredly over his face. "Enough," Kale said quietly, his voice steady but carrying the undercurrent of exhaustion. "This isn't about who's right or wrong, it's about what keeps us alive. We can't afford to fracture now, not when the city is already breaking apart around us." Lyra shot him a glare, but her voice softened. "So what then? We wait for the governor to crush us?" "No," Kale answered. "We find a way to fight smarter, not just harder. Iran's right that we need more information, but we also can't sit still and be slaughtered. We have to balance both." Iran nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "If we coordinate our efforts, combine intelligence gathering with targeted strikes, we might stand a chance." The room fell into a tense silence, each rebel weighing the fragile truce. Outside, the distant rumble of Sky Raiders' engines echoed through the fractured cityscape, a harsh reminder of the dangers pressing in from all sides. The sound vibrated through the metal bones of the floating city, a dreadful herald of the conflicts to come. Kale moved to a battered map spread across the table, fingers tracing the jagged lines of the city's fractured sectors. "We can't afford to lose focus," he said. "Not now. We need to protect the people caught in the crossfire, the innocents who have nowhere else to go." Lyra's fiery gaze softened, though the fire in her eyes remained. "Then we do it together. But if anyone betrays that trust, I won't hesitate to act." Iran's thin lips pressed into a firm line, understanding the gravity behind her words. The fragile alliance was held together by threads of trust, and each rebel's conviction was both their strength and their vulnerability. Kale took a deep breath, feeling the weight of leadership settle more heavily on his shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril not just from the government's forces, but from the fractures within their own ranks. Yet beneath the tension, a spark of hope kindled, a hope that despite their differences, they could forge a future from the ruins. As the distant engines roared louder, signaling an approaching threat, Kale's gaze hardened. "We have no choice but to stand united. For the city, for the earth beneath us." The chapter closed with the rebels preparing for the storm ahead, their fractured loyalties tested, but their resolve unbroken, the fragile alliance teetering on the edge of either salvation or collapse. The rebel hideout was quieter than usual, but the silence was heavy, oppressive. Kale stood at the center of the room, the dim glow of a flickering overhead lamp casting harsh shadows on his weathered face. Around him, faces once filled with hope and defiance were now clouded with suspicion and disbelief. The air smelled faintly of burnt oil and damp metal, a reminder of their precarious existence on the edge of a collapsing world. Kale's voice was steady, but inside turmoil churned. "We have proof," he said, holding up a small data chip, its surface scuffed but containing the truth that could no longer be ignored. "One of us has been feeding information to Governor Ralvik's forces." A sharp intake of breath swept through the group. Lyra's eyes narrowed, fiery as ever, her hands clenched into fists. Iran adjusted his glasses nervously, his usual calm shaken. Even Myra, gentle and steadfast, looked away, the weight of betrayal sinking in. The spy, an unassuming figure who had worked quietly alongside them, now sat motionless, the color drained from their face. No words were exchanged. The evidence was undeniable. The fragile trust that had held the rebels together now lay in ruins. Kale's mind raced. How long had the betrayal lasted? How many plans had been compromised? The answers were as elusive as hope itself. Before they could fully process the revelation, alarms blared, shattering the brief moment of stunned silence. Red emergency lights bathed the hideout as an urgent warning echoed through the rusted corridors. "Sky Guards incoming," Myra shouted, already moving to tend to the wounded. Lyra grabbed her weapons, eyes blazing with fierce determination. "They know where we are. We have to move now." Outside, the skies were a tempest of dark clouds and roaring engines. The rebel skyships, once symbols of defiance, now became desperate vessels of survival. Kale climbed aboard the battered craft, heart pounding as the engines screamed to life. The battle erupted with brutal intensity. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the stormy backdrop. Metal screamed as skyships collided and tore through the air. Jax's raiders, sensing opportunity in the chaos, swooped in, adding to the maelstrom. Lyra fought beside Kale, her short-cropped red hair a streak of fire amidst the smoke and sparks. Her voice cut through the cacophony, sharp commands and fierce encouragement. "Keep formation. Watch the left flank," but the damage was done. The element of surprise was lost, and with it, precious lives. One by one, their skyships faltered, caught in the crossfire of overwhelming forces. Amid the chaos, Kale's mind was a whirlwind of fear and resolve. Every loss was a dagger to his soul, every fallen comrade a reminder of the cost of trust broken. When the battle finally subsided, the rebels gathered beneath the flickering emergency lights of their shattered refuge. The silence was different now, heavier, laden with grief and suspicion. Eyes that once looked to Kale for guidance now questioned his judgment. Whispers of doubt swirled like toxic smoke, threatening to suffocate the fragile hopes that remained. Kale knew the path ahead would be harder than any battle fought in the skies. The real war was just beginning, the war to rebuild trust, to mend fractured hearts, and to find strength in the face of betrayal. Yet even in the depths of despair, a flicker of hope endured. The iron skies above were dark and foreboding, but beneath them, the embers of resistance still glowed, waiting for the breath of conviction to ignite anew. "We survive," Kale whispered to himself, "not because this world is kind, but because we are relentless." And with that, he prepared to lead once more, knowing the cost would be steep, but the cause worth every sacrifice. The night stretched on, heavy with loss and uncertainty, but beneath the shadows, a new chapter was beginning, one that would test the limits of loyalty, courage, and the fragile bonds that hold humanity together in the face of annihilation. Kale's gaze lifted to the iron skies, dark and endless. Somewhere beyond the swirling clouds, the future awaited, and he would face it, no matter what it demanded. The storm was far from over. Continued, the rebel council room was a mess of scattered maps and broken equipment, remnants of the chaos that had engulfed them just hours before. Kale sat heavily on a battered metal crate, the weight of leadership pressing down like the poisoned air they breathed. Around him, the faces of those who had survived bore the scars of battle and betrayal alike. Lyra paced, her fiery spirit undimmed even in defeat. "We can't keep running," she said, voice fierce. "Ralvik's spies have us cornered. We need a new plan, something they won't expect." Iran, ever the voice of reason, nodded slowly. "We must assume more spies exist. The leak that led to this attack could be part of a larger network. Our information is compromised. Myra tended quietly to the wounded, her hands gentle yet steady. Trust is shattered, she murmured. How do we rebuild when every shadow could hide an enemy? Kale looked around the room, meeting each gaze. The question echoed within him. Leadership was no longer just about strategy, it was about healing, about bringing broken people back from the edge. We start by finding the truth, Kale said finally, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. We root out the spies, mend our fractures. We fight not just for survival, but for the future we believe in. A tentative nod passed through the group. The road ahead was uncertain, but surrender was not an option. Outside, the iron skies rumbled, a grim reminder that their enemies watched from above. But below, in the hearts of the rebels, a spark of defiance smoldered, ready to ignite once again. Kale stood, feeling the weight of every lost soul and every hope that still lingered. The silent betrayal had cut deep, but it had not broken them. Not yet. And as the first light of dawn crept beneath the heavy clouds, Kale made a silent vow. No matter the cost, he would lead them through the darkness toward whatever dawn awaited beneath the iron skies. The fight was far from over, and the true battle for their world had only just begun. The storm was gathering. The sky trembled first, a low, ominous rumble that rolled across the vast expanse of the floating city like a warning thunderclap. Kale's gaze lifted instinctively from the shattered panel he was scavenging. His breath caught as the distant hum of the city's giant engines faltered, a sinister groan threading through the air. The sections of the metropolis, those colossal iron leviathans suspended above the poisoned earth, shuddered violently, their intricate lifelines of cables and supports straining under invisible forces. Suddenly, a horrendous crack split the air, sharp and final. Kale's heart hammered as he saw a massive segment of the city's lower-tier fracture, a gaping wound tearing through the steel and glass. Screams erupted around him, an unrelenting tide of panic and terror. The ground beneath their feet, once a stable platform in the skies, betrayed them, crumbling and dropping with terrifying speed. Dust and debris clouded the air, blurring the skyline with choking ash. Kale moved without hesitation, instincts honed by years of surviving the city's cruel edges guiding him through the chaos. The sharp tang of burnt ozone and twisted metal filled his nostrils. He dodged falling beams and shattered panels, his scavenger's hands pulling at wreckage to free trapped civilians. "Help! Over here!" a voice pierced the din. Kale followed the cry to a collapsed walkway where a young woman lay pinned beneath a twisted girder. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked with his. He gritted his teeth and heaved the metal away, fingers scraping against sharp edges. The weight lifted, and she gasped, clutching his arm. Nearby, Lyra's voice crackled over a battered comlink. "Kale, I'm en route with the skiff. Hold on to those survivors." Her tone was steady, fierce even, cutting through the turmoil like a beacon. Kale's respect for her courage deepened with every desperate moment. He glanced up just in time to see her skiff slicing through the thick smoke, weaving nimbly between the falling debris and twisted structures. Her red hair was aflame against the gray sky, a symbol of hope amid ruin. The roar of the engines battled with the screams and groans of the breaking city, but Lyra's presence was a promise. They were not yet defeated. In the command chamber high above, Governor Ralvik stood rigid, his sharp eyes narrowed as the chaos unfolded on the holoscreens. His voice was cold steel as he barked orders to his elite sky guards. "Contain the panic. Secure the perimeter. No one leaves without authorization. We cannot afford total collapse." Ralvik's face betrayed a flicker of unease, quickly masked by austere resolve. The city was his dominion, a fragile order he had fought decades to maintain. Yet beneath his unyielding exterior lay a growing dread. The city's failures were accelerating, and with them, the threat to his power. Back on the fractured platforms, Kale's hands were raw and bleeding, but he refused to stop. Each life saved was a victory against the despair threatening to consume them all. He pulled another survivor from the wreckage, a small boy, eyes wide with shock, clutching a battered toy. Kale's voice was gentle despite the chaos. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." The collapse had shattered more than steel. It cracked the very illusion of safety that had held the city's inhabitants captive. Whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire, fueled by the tangible proof that their floating sanctuary was failing. Kale knew this moment would change everything. "We can't keep living like this," he murmured, eyes scanning the horizon where the city's lights flickered uncertainly. "Something has to give." The survivors gathered at makeshift shelters, their faces etched with grief and fear, but also a flicker of determination. Lyra's skiff touched down amid the crowd, and she was already organizing triage with Myra, the medic whose calm presence was a balm against the storm. "We need to move fast," Myra urged, bandaging wounds with practiced hands. "The city's still unstable. Aftershocks could come at any moment." Kale nodded, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. The disaster was a brutal reminder of the stakes. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of humanity itself. As night fell, the city's fractured silhouette against the darkening sky was a stark testament to fragility. Yet amid the ruins, Kale's resolve hardened. He would lead, not because he sought power, but because no one else could. The first tremors of rebellion had begun, and the iron skies would never be the same. But questions lingered like the smoke in the air. How long could the floating cities hold? And what truths lay buried beneath the poisoned earth, waiting to be uncovered? Kale's gaze drifted downward, toward the hazy, toxic ground far below. The answer might lie there, hidden in darkness, waiting for those brave enough to seek it. The city trembled again, but this time, so did the hearts of its people. Change was coming, and Kale would be at its center. The sky overhead was a bruised canvas of darkening orange and purple, the last light of day bleeding through the fractured expanse of the floating city. Kale crouched low behind a jagged piece of twisted steel, his breath shallow and controlled, each inhale tasting of rust and dust. Beside him, Lyra adjusted the grip on her makeshift rifle, her eyes sharp and wary, scanning the horizon as the distant rumble of engines grew louder by the second. "They're coming," Lyra whispered, her voice taut with urgency. "Sky guards, elite units." Kale nodded, muscles coiling with a mix of fear and determination. The city was a fragile beast, its iron bones creaking under the weight of neglect and decay. Every day brought new threats, but none as imminent as the arrival of Ralvik's enforcers. The governor was tightening his grip, deploying his elite sky guards to snuff out the flickering embers of rebellion before they could flare into a blaze. The roar of jet engines sliced through the thickening air, a piercing sound that set Kale's heart hammering. Shadows darted across the ruined platforms, the silhouettes of government fighters moving with ruthless precision. The rebels were outnumbered and outgunned, but retreat was not an option. "Ready?" Kale muttered, his voice barely audible. Lyra's fierce gaze met his. "Always." They emerged from their cover, weaving through the skeletal remains of machinery and shattered conduits. The city's hollow bones echoed with the distant blasts of pulse weapons and the sharp crackle of comms chatter. Explosions blossomed in the distance, sending showers of sparks raining into the toxic sky. A sky guard jet screamed overhead, its sleek form a blur against the fiery backdrop. Kale felt the wind shift as a volley of pulse blasts tore through the air, striking the platform mere feet away. He shoved Lyra down just in time, the shockwave rattling their bones. "Move," Lyra hissed, dragging Kale toward a narrow passageway between rusted walls. Their boots clattered against the metal grating as they sprinted, the sound swallowed by the chaos around them. Behind, the enforcers pressed forward, their footsteps a relentless tide of oppression. Kale's mind raced, calculating odds and options even as adrenaline surged through his veins. Above the battle, in the cold, sterile command center, Governor Ralvik stood like a statue carved from ice. His sharp features were illuminated by the cold glow of hollow screens displaying the city's fractured zones and rebel positions. The hum of surveillance drones filled the room, an unceasing reminder of his reach. "Increase patrols," Ralvik ordered, voice clipped and commanding. "No quarter. These insurgents threaten the order we've fought to maintain." His advisors nodded, their expressions a mix of fear and obedience. Ralvik's iron will was the fragile glue holding the city's elite together, his belief that control at any cost was the only path to survival. Back in the shadows of the crumbling city, Kale and Lyra found a brief respite. Their breaths came in ragged bursts, faces streaked with grime and sweat. Around them, the distant sounds of battle ebbed and flowed like a storm at sea. "We can't keep running," Kale said, voice low, eyes scanning the horizon for movement. Lyra's jaw tightened. "Then we don't. We fight. For every scrap of sky we still hold." The weight of their choices pressed down on them, yet beneath the exhaustion flickered a stubborn spark of hope. The rebellion was no longer whispered in shadows. It roared across the iron skies with the promise of change. But with every skirmish, the lines between friend and foe blurred, and the cost of defiance grew heavier. As night began to shroud the city in darkness, Kale looked up at the looming silhouette of the floating metropolis, its fractured spires piercing the stars. The battle lines were drawn, and the fight for the future of their world had only just begun. "We survive," Kale vowed, "or we fall together." The echoes of that promise carried through the iron skies, a challenge thrown down in the face of an unforgiving world. And somewhere in the shadows, Governor Ralvik watched, the cold glint of power and fear intertwined in his gaze. The city held its breath, teetering on the edge of chaos.